As a friend once told me, thank you, Anna, am I right? It's so true. Our next guest is talking exactly about that. She's an Emmy-nominated producer. She's the author of best-selling books, including The Monopolists and The Longest Race. She also contributes to the Vanity Fair, New York Times, and many more. Please, a big round of applause to Meri Pilon.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This is my first time in Tbilisi, and when your wonderful organizers reached out to me, they were like, well, you know, can you come? And I said, absolutely. And I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? And I cast a really wide open question. And they looked at my website and they kind of poked around and they said, losers. And my heart just soared because of all the things I've worked on. This is the project that's probably nearest and dearest to my heart, and no one asks about it. And we're gonna talk a little bit about why that might be. I think that cover says a lot. You've heard a lot so far from pro athletes, people here who've done incredible things in sports. I'm not one of them. I hated sports as a kid growing up. My dad and my brother played American football. We're really obsessed with it. I despise sports. Like, I was that kid. So you're gonna hear about things from the other side of the scoreboard. So sports, this is normally what we think of, right? We think of victory. We think of these huge moments, you know, the trophies in the air, the Olympic gold medals, the confetti, the excitement, the euphoria, the joy. If you're a Formula One driver, champagne apparently getting splayed in your face, dangerously close. These are the moments that we tune in for. There are heaps of magazines and podcasts and books. People are obsessed with winning, especially in America, but this is a global phenomenon. People want to know, how did people win? Why did people win? What does it take? There's something almost magical about the aura or the glow of an athlete. And I've had the opportunity to write a lot of those stories, to be in these kind of transcendent, huge, larger-than-life things. So look, it's me and John Cena. He's a winner. He wins at multiple things. He's a big winner when it comes to movies, as well as in wrestling. Look, it's Kara Goucher. She's a two-time Olympian. We wrote a whole book together. She won a silver medal at Worlds in the 10,000 meters. Her, like, slow I'm injured pace nearly kills me. She won a lawsuit against Nike. Who wins against Nike? It's crazy. She made her second Olympic team after having a baby. If that isn't athleticism, I don't know what is. Oh look, it's Lindsey Vonn, maybe the best skier of all time. All of these people are extremely good at what they do, and Rachel was talking about this a little bit earlier, but the cool thing about being an outsider in sports is when you're this close to it, what you don't see on TV is the insane amount of time and hours and grit it takes to do something well, but to do it consistently and win. So I just wanted to do some winner name dropping at the beginning to give people their due. This isn't to, you know, be mean to people who work their butts off, because they certainly do. Great, but that's not why we're here today, because the truth is winning after a while can get kind of boring. So my friend Louisa Thomas and I, we were catching up and we were having coffee. Louisa writes about sports for The New Yorker. We met working on some articles for Grantland, which was owned by ESPN. Rest in peace. It was this amazing website for very creative, cool sports writing. The archive is online. Please check it out. We were just catching up, and we were talking about how, in our own personal lives, some of the biggest things that have shaped us were loss. Could be a breakup, could be a job loss, could be a death. And then we started talking about the different stories we were working on, athletes we were drawn to, and why. And we were like, why don't people talk about losing? Oh, surely someone must have done a book about losing. I mean, that's like 50%, if not more, of sports, right? And we like pulled out our phones, and we started Googling, and we've realized that no one had done a book about losing. And sometimes when you're angry or frustrated about something, that's the cue that you're the person who should be doing it. So we were like, well, this is cool, and we like each other, and we like our stories. So we cast a wide net, And we reached out to some of our favorite athletes. We dreamed really big, some of our biggest sports writers. And we were like, hey, we think there might be something to be said about losing. We want to investigate this. And we went big. So over many years, we learned a lot about losing. It is a huge taboo. We thought people didn't want to talk about it, but once we opened up the door a little bit, we were really blown away by the response that we got. It turns out people do want to talk about it. And this is like the vibe we were thinking. Like, this isn't like in tech and Silicon Valley and business, there's a lot of preciousness around failure. And I started my company in my garage and it didn't work out, but I still had millions of dollars to vacation on. And that's not what we're talking about. We wanted to get into the emotional grit, the real oomph of what losing is all about. So early on, we found this quote from Floyd Patterson. Floyd Patterson was this amazing boxer, and he really crystallized our argument, which is it's easy to do anything in victory. It's in defeat that a man reveals himself. We've all experienced some version of this, right? When things are good, we're out and about, we feel great. When we've just been like hit with something, that's not when you want to post on social media. Nobody likes to post like, I'm having a terrible day. Like, we all doll ourselves up and we create different stories. But I love this quote because our argument was the stories of losing are discarded. Editors don't want to do them, athletes don't want to talk about them, and a lot of sports writers don't want to touch them, but there's so much gold in there, no pun intended. There's so much that we can learn. And so when we saw this Floyd Patterson quote, which is from a piece by Gay Talese, who's one of my favorite sports writers of all time, we knew we were on the right path. So why are we so weird about losing? If losing is such a common experience, why, even just like mentioning it here, you can kind of see people like get a little squirmy. One is really obvious. Losing sucks. It feels bad. And I'm sure someone who's more educated in the world of medicine than me could tell you about we don't have the endorphins, we don't have the adrenaline, we emotionally get sad. It can even bring on a state of depression, lower or higher grade, depending on how bad the loss is. Related to that, losing is a form of grief. So we've all experienced grief in some capacity, right? And so loss in sports can kind of tug on this bigger boulder, this bigger thing that we might be feeling. And it might, really get to deeper emotions that we may not even have known were there. There's a stigma attached. So think about when there's a big, big win. The locker room of the winner is this joyous place, and people are so excited. I've seen the locker rooms of losers, and not just locker room smell. There's like a weird mood. Like, people do not want to be there. It's really awkward. We don't really know how to handle it. The reporters are weird. The teammates are weird. And then there's good old-fashioned shame. So when you lose, you might have shame on the inside, like you feel like you let yourself down. You might have external shame that could be from a overbearing parent. It could be from a friend, a family member. At the Olympics, I can't tell you how many people told me I feel shame of my country. That's a big old burden to be carrying onto whatever your sport is. But I'm going to take it even a step further. Losing is about death. Yes, we're going to go there. I don't know how many of you woke up and thought, wow, I'm going to go to this cool event about sports and learn about death. But here we are. Bear with me for an existential moment. So this came about because I soon came across the work of Ernest Becker. And he has this idea of terror management theory. Ernest Becker is a really influential psychologist. He wrote this book called The Denial of Death. It won the Pulitzer in 1974. I hadn't heard of it. And I love this book title because it's so literal. Often psychologists, they're very verbose. There's a lot of words. There's a lot to unpack. But really what he is arguing is that human beings, we experience this conflict between wanting to live and knowing that death is inevitable. So whatever your religion, whatever your politics, whatever part of the world you're in, on some level, we as human beings know we're going to die at some point in this life as we know it. A lot to process, right? He thinks so too. And the irony to this of me is that the world's chaotic and crazy, and this is the only thing that's really certain, and we're freaked out about it, and we're really confused. So if we all know we're gonna die, what does that have to do with sports? Well, we adopt a hero system. And Becker argues that the main task of human life is to become heroic and transcend death. And I love that word, transcend, rise above. Sports is amazing for this. Look at some of these people. The word transcendent absolutely comes to mind if you watch Simone Biles. Absolutely comes to mind when you see, Serena Williams play. And think about this in terms of team sports too, right? So I may not live forever, but my soccer team might. I come from a world where there's a lot of football. Like, my dad was an Oregon Ducks fan, has been for many years. My grandfather was, my brother is, and my nephew, who lives in town, is probably also going to go to Duck games. That's 4 generations of sports fans with just one team. That is transcendent. That is a team or a name or something that does make us feel, and often does outlive us. And that's pretty wild when you think about it. So I want to walk you through a few of the case studies that we got that really changed how I view losing and broke this down for me a lot more. So this first one came from my friend Bob Sullivan. Little did I know my friend Bob Sullivan, who's an amazing journalist, he's worked at MSNBC for a long time, he played semi-pro baseball with this guy, Frank Euphemia. So Frank Euphemia, I don't know how much everyone knows about minor league baseball and semi-pro baseball, but it's a slog. It is really, really hard. You're making almost no money. You're eating stale hot dogs. Your body is destroyed. You're touring these incredibly unglamorous parts of the country, often like sleeping on people's couches. It's really rough. And the reason these guys do it is they dream of making it into pro baseball. And Frank Euphemia is no different. He's a guy in New Jersey, and he dreams of playing for the New York Yankees. So as he's kind of coming up through baseball in the early to mid-90s, something wild happens, which is in 1995, for the first time ever, there might not be baseball. And that is because of a labor strike. The baseball union and the owners are at loggerheads over how to start the season. I can't describe to you what this means to Americans. Imagine if somebody said to Georgia, no national team for a year. People would lose their minds. Like, that's not how it's supposed to go. So people were really freaked out. There's going to be no baseball. So the owners of Major League Baseball teams, there had actually been a football lockout a few years prior, and they say, this isn't going to stop us. We're going to enlist other players who aren't in the union. We're going to find some replacements. And who do they call but Frank Euphemia? So he gets this phone call, and he's like, this is the best day of my life. I'm going to put on pinstripes. I'm going to play for the New York Yankees. I can't believe this is happening. Except something even more insane happens, which is Sonia Sotomayor, of all people, she's known to most Americans as a Supreme Court justice. There she is with a Muppet. She was then a district judge, and she issues the ruling that ends the strike. And at the time, this was huge news because we all thought we weren't going to have baseball. So all of a sudden, baseball fans, athletes, everyone is overjoyed. The strike is over. This is such amazing news. But the one person who's really bummed is Frank Euphemia. His dream is over. He's never going to play for the New York Yankees. And one of the things that came up over and over again, we were talking to people about losing, is this word isolation, that it can really feel like you're alone. And I think this story also illustrates losing can be really complicated. At the very moment Frank was at his saddest is when the rest of the world was celebrating. And he loves baseball. Ordinarily, you'd be really excited that your sport is coming back to life, but no. And I think I love stories that aren't just black and white and a lot of gray, and I think Frank's really illustrates that. So next, we're gonna talk about soccer, because I knew I couldn't come to Georgia and not talk about soccer. So we're gonna talk about Liu Ying. So the 1999 Women's World Cup was a big watershed moment for women's sports. This is a picture of the Rose Bowl in Pasadena in California. And I remember watching this game as a kid, and it blew my mind. The US and China were in this huge rivalry, and there were 90,000 fans at this game. That was unheard of at that time, except for in 1971, as we know now from Rachel's film. When we think of this game, you think of Brandi Chastain. This is like an iconic moment in sports. And what I love about this piece in particular is that, especially in America, we don't think about the China side of things. What does it mean? Most of us, when we fail, we do so privately. When you're an athlete, you're failing publicly in front of millions of people. You also win that way, but you also can fail that way. The game turns out to be a real nail-biter, stuff of TV gold. And I'll just play a clip from the very end. So it gets into a shootout, and Ying is up to make the kick.
Ying will go next. The first starter for China to take a penalty kick. The shot, save, scoring!
Yeah, it's a bummer. So one of the people watching this at home is Gay Talese, the journalist I mentioned earlier. And he says, never in the history of China had a single person been embarrassed in front of so many people. China's got a population of about 1 billion people, plus the rest of the world is tuning in. So what does Gay Talese do? He gets on a plane and he goes to China and he tries to track down Ying, and he's wanting to figure out her side of the story. What happened? Why did it happen? How did it feel? All of the big questions that a great journalist like Talese would have. And what he finds is that, and you know, Clarence kind of talked about this last night, sometimes you just lose. And that's how it is. It might be the football gods. It might be that the other team played really well. I rewatched this game, and China played masterfully. I didn't see anything that they should be ashamed of. I mean, I think the win was for soccer overall. The level of play had evolved so much. But it can still suck, right? Like, it still sucks to lose. And I'm including this story because I think sometimes when people lose, we have this temptation to say, it's fine, it's okay. But like, sometimes it's not, and it just is. And there isn't a why or a how. But part of why we watch sports are the drama, and sometimes people have to lose. And I think that's hard for us to kind of process and think about, but I think this story also shows that you can move on from a loss. Ying goes on and has a life outside of soccer, and this doesn't become her defining moment. So next up is LeBron James. So Ryan O'Hanlon, who's a sports writer who I really like, he reached out to me and Louisa, and he said, I've got a loser story for you, LeBron James. And I was like, when I think of LeBron James, there's a lot of things I think of, but loser isn't one of them. But Ryan made his case, a version of which I'll share with you. So this is the first time that LeBron James appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He's a teenager. And you can see from this title, The Chosen One, there were huge expectations for LeBron, literally as a child. And this is the headline that ran. It says, Ohio high school junior LeBron James is so good that he's already being mentioned as the heir to Air Jordan. Being compared to Michael Jordan as a high school kid, that's a lot. And one of the many things that I think makes LeBron so extraordinary is he is this athlete who was seen as a prodigy. And not only did he not burn out or quit, he exceeded expectations. And he has impacted basketball really dramatically. So I was like, Ryan, like, what are you talking about? LeBron's not a loser. And he said, well, let's think about the Michael Jordan comparison. So Michael Jordan, he always won. He had 6 tries, and he won 6 championships. The last run for that you can watch in the documentary The Last Dance on Netflix, which I really loved. And one of the things that really comes clear in that documentary is Michael Jordan, and this maybe is obvious, he's so competitive. He's so focused. I would never want to play this man in anything, board game, basketball, whatever, because he's just like a laser. So LeBron James, he's had 10 trips to the NBA Finals. So let's just like appreciate that for a minute. That's crazy. Making it into the NBA, the odds are so slim. To get to the finals, even slimmer. To do it 10 times is absolutely wild. So when I look at that, I think, what a life, what an achievement. But he's only won 4 times. And Ryan pointed out that LeBron doesn't see the 4 wins with 3 different teams or the 10 trips. He sees the 6 that got away from him. And I love this quote from LeBron. So he says, you know, when I have a bad game, it continues to humble me. And know that, you know, you still have work to do, and you still have a lot of people to impress. I hate letting my teammates down. I know I'm not going to make every shot. Sometimes I try to make the right play, and if it results in a loss, I feel awful. What I love about this quote is that LeBron James has all the money in the world. He's done extraordinary things in his sport. But if I read this and didn't know if it was from him, this could be from like a college or high school player. He cares that much about his teammates. He's humble. Hard to stay humble when you've got that kind of money and fame and attention on you. And the loss haunts him. We talk a lot about loser stories. They're kind of like ghost stories because there's the story of the losing and there's the story of the win that wasn't. The ghost of the win. And I think LeBron, there's some shadow of that, right? Like he just sees this alternate reality of the win that he should have had. And I think the lesson here is losing can be a great motivator. LeBron is a great example of something I've seen in a lot of athletes, which is if you really want to piss someone off, if you really want to get them in the gym, looking at their extra tape, studying their playbook, they lose, or they're worried about losing, and it grinds on them. And someone like LeBron, you know, he's so competitive that he has this ability to take this energy and really harness it and really use it to become better. And I like that even if you're LeBron James, you can still feel that, and you still can be pissed off and hungry and want to work even harder. And a side note on Michael Jordan, for those who don't know, there's this famous story that he didn't make the varsity cut of his sophomore year of high school. And I've never interviewed Michael Jordan, but I've always wanted to know, like, at what point in his career was he willing to let this go? Like, at what point could he say to his high school coach, like, I proved you wrong? So I always, like, when I'm working with, like, high school students, I always try to remind them of things like this, that most great athletes weren't peaking in high school. LeBron is, again, like a super example. And that if you are set back, you can go on and become Michael Jordan. It's really easy. So last but not least, and I think this is my favorite losing story of all time, we're going to talk about Matt Emmons. So does anyone follow Olympic shooting? Exactly. Matt Emmons was, he was an American shooter. He was kind of like the LeBron James of shooting. He was winning a lot of titles. He was a huge, huge star in the sport. And going into the 2004 Olympics, he was widely favored to not just win the gold medal, but really, really dominate. So going into his final shot in the 3 positions event, so shooting's kind of like track, there's multiple events. I won't go into the details of what the 3 positions is. Anyway, he was in first place. He only needed a mediocre score for gold. So he's so dominant that going into that last round, he's way above. He can suck and still win a gold medal, which is really impressive when you think about it. The problem is he shot the wrong target. This is crazy. Stuff like this doesn't happen at an Olympics. This would be like a runner not tying their shoelace or something. Like, you don't see this kind of stuff at the Olympics. So Matt, he's really upset. And he does what any reasonable person would do after totally tanking publicly, and he goes to the bar. So the bar at like a lot of Olympic venues, it's like this, often they're like made of cardboard. Like, they're not actually like these cute like pubs and wine bars that you have here. They're like kind of collapsing, and the beer is really crappy and it's overpriced. And he's sitting there having a beer and just kind of soaking it all in, and he's immediately setting his sights on Beijing. He says, you know what, in 4 years, I'm gonna be at this again. You can see he finished a very disappointing 8th place, and to the point of sometimes you get beat by nice people. You can see his buddy from the US got the silver medal, and he's not even in contention. So he went from being the favored to win gold in the final round to plummeting. But he gets ready, he goes to Beijing, and he qualifies, and he makes the team again. He has some really great seasons leading into it. He's really getting his confidence back. And going into the same event at the same point, he needs a 6.7. So also dominating. And an 8, just for people who don't follow shooting, is like really easy. So we'll watch, for those of you who weren't following 2008 Olympic shooting, we're just gonna watch the clip of the end of how it worked out.
Here in Beijing, he already got the silver on August 5th.
That's his coach.
9-4, 10-26.
Target completely. This shocked the shooting world. He basically choked the same way twice. That's crazy. His finger slipped. He scored 4.4. He finished in 4th place. He called the shot a freak of nature. So we just need to take a beat here and talk about 4th place. So this is from a project I worked on at the New York Times where we interviewed tons of people at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi about what it feels like to come in 4th place. There's different flavors of losing, right? If you finish 7th, 8th, kind of, you know, like what Matt did in 2004, you say, you know what, today wasn't my day. I wasn't close. If you finish 4th, it's terrible, because you're like close enough to smell the podium, but you still ultimately are just in the back of the pack. And if you tell people you're an Olympian, one of the first things that people ask is like, well, how did you do? And if you answer 4th, it's just a weird answer. Now look, I'm not the 4th best in the world at anything. I think it's still deeply impressive, but I love this graphic because it really captures how people feel. And in some sports, like luge or speed skating or sprinting, you could come into 4th place by 1/10 of a second, 100th of a second, and for the rest of your life, that's the story. So the next time you see someone who finished in 4th place, I just ask, like, give them a little extra love. It's a really tough place to be in, and it's very, I don't think it's discussed enough. But anyway, back to Matt, our 4th place finisher. So Bill Cole, who's a sports psychologist, which I am not, Matt Emmons started to get a lot of tension outside of the shooting world because this freakish, it's like lightning striking twice. He's choked in the same way, in the same event, 2 different times, and in every other competition, he's just smoking people. So in The New Yorker, he talks about how he might suffer from failure syndrome. So there are athletes who have almost a post-traumatic stress related to when they lose in sports, especially because most athletes have to keep competing. They have to figure out a way to deal with this loss, and that's really, really complicated. So I don't know if these are useful or not, but I'm gonna pass on some of Dr. Cole's suggestions. Number 1, define failure on your own terms. Did you fail, or is it a learning situation? So that's like the LeBron James approach, right? Like, I'm gonna dig into this, I'm gonna extract all that I can, great. Number 2, extract all the wisdom from the situation, and this is my favorite part, and never bring it up again. So just like squeeze everything you can out of it, and then if anybody asks you about it, just say, I've moved on. That's another approach. Number 3, turn lemons into lemonade. Find something humorous about it and refer to the situation that way. Now this one I kind of struggle with because, like, when you see these things up close, they're not funny. Like, there's that expression that humor is tragedy plus time. I don't know how I feel about that, but like, take it if you will. You know, maybe there's some lemonade makers here. So let's go back to Matt, and let's go back to that bar in 2004 when he's drinking his beer and being really sad about publicly failing. He meets this lady there, Katerina Kurkova. She's among the people who watched him completely eat it, and they start talking. And guess what? They fall in love. And then guess what? They get married. They have a baby. They're now like this wonderful story. And here's what's even crazier. She wins a gold medal at the Beijing Olympics because she's a hell of a shot. She competes for the Czech Republic. So had Matt Emmons not lost horribly and gone to that bar, he wouldn't have found the love of his life. There's now a human being on this planet that we owe to a really terrible loss in shooting. And they're like this great power couple, and they make each other better. And like, they were together as she went up to win this gold medal. And in the end, he conquered his demons, and he won a bronze medal at the 2012 Olympics in this event. All is well. And what I think about this story is that, like, sometimes losing is the best possible thing that can happen to you. And it might not make sense when you're in it, but boy, I give Matt a lot of credit. He hung in there, and he got the bronze medal, and he got the girl. It took him a long time. He was tough as nails. And while we're on the subject of bronze medalists, I was really surprised to learn that there is research indicating that bronze medalists are actually happier than the people who win silver. That's counterintuitive, right? The general thinking, and you could read more about this paper, is that silver medalists are looking at gold. They have FOMO. They're like, that could have been me. Bronze medalists are like thrilled to be at the party. They're the people who often were seated, 7th, 8th, 9th, and then they get like cool hardware and national acclaim and often bonus money. So their whole attitude is very different. So we have like this weird relationship with achievement, and we have these expressions like go for the gold. And as time goes on, I'm kind of thinking like, let's go for the bronze. These people seem to be really happy. I mean, you saw how happy Matt looked with his bronze medal. Just thinking, I'm sure the Olympic Committee doesn't need my consulting on that. So a couple of final thoughts. So while I was working on this, I was helping my dad pack up our attic. He's a total hoarder. And I found this picture of me. This is the beginning and end of my diving career. And I totally had no memory of this. I don't know if you can tell this photo or not, but my arms are crossed. And I'm like not interested in going in that pool. And I love my parents for a lot of reasons, including that they took this picture, because I think on some level, even at this young age, I'm probably, 4 or 5 years old there, they knew that this was the peak, like that this was like the athletic achievement. Some kids, their parents have trophies and all these things. My parents were like, her being stubborn on a diving board in front of all these strangers, this is it. And it totally, to me, captured, I realized like, this book was in me for a long time. I've actually been obsessed with losing and defiance in sports for a long time. And to lose is to be human. It's part of how we all operate. It's part of what makes us all function. And it can be a matter of perception. I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed incredible athletes who lose, and they're like, I suck, I failed, like they're so hard on themselves. And then you talk to their friend, their roommate, their partner, whoever, and they're like, I'm blown away by their work ethic. I'm blown away by how they handled this, that, or the other. So often we internalize this sense of being a loser, and it's actually not even really true, and it's not how everybody else sees us. And on that note, it's up to us to shape our own stories of loss or otherwise. Losing is a fact of life. It's going to happen. It has happened to everyone in this room. But the really exciting part, and why I loved being able to write and do a book about this, is that we individually get to decide how we talk about that, how we own that story. So Luis and I were wrapping up our collection. This was like mid-late 2019, and something really crazy about books is that you have to finish the book, and then you have to wait months before it actually comes out. So the publisher takes the book, and you can't make any corrections on it, and Penguin Random House said, okay, great, your book is done, and it's gonna be coming out in the summer of 2020. And Louisa and I are like, great, summer 2020. I'm not doing anything, and I think we all know what happened between 2019 and summer 2020, which is that sports evaporated. We didn't have sports in the United States. We didn't even have the opportunity to lose, which was something I realized I had taken for granted. And what's more, we had a ton of loss. Millions of people died. We had people losing jobs. We had people losing their ways of life. And so when the book came out, it was way more relevant than we thought. And we ended up talking to people on a much different level than we ever had anticipated. We originally thought this was kind of a funny, goofy book, and in some ways it is. But we realized that this is really not just about sports, but it's about all of us. And I, like everybody, was really sad. I want to go back to Frank Euphemia. In 2020, there was no baseball. And I went home to Oregon, and baseball is a big part of how I spend time with my dad and my brother. And it was so weird because there were no games. There were those weird ones on TV. And the Seattle Mariners, who are my team, who are the only team in baseball history to never appear at a World Series. They are very bad. They're a losing team, but they're my team. They did this promotion that a lot of baseball teams did where they said, okay, due to COVID restrictions, we can't have fans in the stands, but you can buy a cardboard cutout. And I was like, okay, that's better than nothing. So I want to leave you with this weird cardboard cutout of my dog, who saw more baseball in 2020 than probably I or anybody really did. And this note that we're all losers and that that's okay. And I also will leave you with my 4th place ribbon from my high school track career, my participation certificate in gymnastics, my contact info, and I'm happy to take any questions you guys might have. Thank you.
Thank you so, so much. If you have any questions, please, for Mary, we will take 1, 2 questions, if there's any.
Everything's fair game. Woot.
First of all, thank you for your just different perspectives you brought to us. UFC winner Ilya said, quote like this, finally winners all those who are loved by society. And if we take into consideration recent times when our football team is like the winner or has gone to Europe Championship, it's like we love them and we adore them, and okay, but what should be the motivation here to be loved or to be proud of yourself? How can we beat this sense of being ashamed of ourselves because we lose or because we just frustrate the society who trusted us to just be winners? But we are not winners because we lost, yeah?
So that's a great question. So a few things. One is that I think when you lose a lot, it makes winning that much more sweet. It makes when you make it to that next level that much more dramatic because it's so hard fought for. One of the examples that I didn't talk about here is like the Boston Red Sox. They hadn't won a World Series. And then in 2004, when they did, I was living in New York at the time, people lost their minds. So I think for Georgia fans, you know, it takes time to build a winning team. It takes a lot of losing to become a winner. We don't see that. We don't see all the losing because people don't like talking about it. But I think it's actually really important because that's how you learn and that's how you grow. And I think part of, you know, with COVID, what I didn't really consider is that you have to lose to win. That's the path. Everyone's a beginner at some point, and you're not exposed to that. And so I think that losing is part of the privilege of competing. That's the risk you have to take. And we like talking about risks when they pay off, but that's part of the road, you know? And I think it's also exciting because there are people who don't even have teams. There are people who don't even get out on the field of play. You know, I'm really into running, and I ran a marathon in December, and it wasn't the time I wanted, but I got to the end and I was like, I ran a marathon, you know? Like, and I think that's, you know, especially for Georgia and just thinking about the history of this country, you guys have a soccer team, and they made it, like, it's awesome. Like, it doesn't always happen overnight. I don't know, did I answer your question? Yeah, go Georgia. I'm rooting for this team. Do we have time for any other questions? There's a mic around. Yes.
First of all, hello. It was a very nice conversation. And I want to ask about our football team also. As you might know, we lost one final back in 2020, and we now have one. And I want to ask about the two matches, one final that we lost and one final that we won. What's your perspective? What do you think? Do we know the value of winning after we lost the final? Was losing the final necessary for us to feel the feeling of win? And how can losing one final influence winning another? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I get the question right or addressed, but like, how did losing help win? Is that, yeah, I think it's huge because really good athletes know that they're going to lose, and they go back, and instead of ignoring it and saying, oh, I lost, I don't want to think about it or talk about it, they take a minute, you know, you're allowed to grieve, and then they go back and rip apart. What did I learn? What could we do better with? What are the things that we can fine tune? What was the other team doing that we can rip off, that we can steal? So I think that that's a big part of how winning teams get built, is that they really take losing as an opportunity to get better, to learn. And again, it's like the other question. It's like, that takes a lot of time. That's a real big process. It's hard to get good at anything. I think with sports, it's so public and you have millions of people watching. But think about any of us, any of our skills. I was a really terrible writer. I still am, to be honest. Like, I have days where I'm like, ooh. And you just get up and you get back and you do it over and over and over again. But again, I think it's really complicated. And I think that when fans keep showing up, even when the team is losing, that's really important too. Like, I can't tell you how many athletes just say, oh my gosh, the fans were there and that meant the world. So you can always have an opportunity to be a big cheerleader as well. Any other questions? We're done? We're good?
So if there's no more questions, then we're done. Thank you so much, Mary. I will keep in mind all those happy thoughts about losing when I will lose. I'm a terrible sore loser, so I will really try to keep in mind.